Welcome to another exciting episode of The Trading Bell. Today on the program, we are speaking to the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Tourism and Wildlife, that is Honorable Najib Balala, who is joining us from his home, and we'll be discussing a lot on how the industry has been coping and what are the solutions moving forward. Such a pleasure to see you, Honorable Najib.
Thank you very much. You can see now we have to configure our homes to be offices as well. So we are struggling, all of us.
I agree. How are you coping with quarantine so far?
Well, it makes us work even much more harder because we are on our toes. I have a sector that is really been shuttered, but I know I am proactively participating with the sector of how we are going to get a solution together. And we need to be united. The unity of purpose is now to get a solution, because otherwise our businesses are going to collapse and government revenues are going to collapse.
All right, Najib, let's talk about now how the impact has been for the tourism sector. Of course, we know quite a number of flights cannot come into the country. We also do know that the hotel facilities, some of them have had to shut down because of low business. Just paint for us the picture. How severe is the situation in Kenya?
Well, the tourism industry is 10% of the GDP directly, and now we have evaluated is almost 20% of the GDP because of the linkages to other subsectors. But it generates $1.6 billion, and also it employs over 1.6 million people directly. And this is a major impact by the corona crisis. So most of our facilities, 99% of the facilities are shut, restaurants, hotels, airlines. And this is the time we've realized tourism cannot work without airlines. So the revival of the aviation sector is crucial, and government must look at the industry holistically. So it's not just about bringing tourists into the country, it's how do we bring tourists into the country? How do we make sure that these things work in harmony as a collective sector? So yes, we have learned a lot, but also the challenges are huge because people are out of jobs, businesses have shut, there's no cash flow. So we have been working with the industry, and we are lucky that we were the first sector to consult the industry on the first week of March before even a single case appeared into Kenya. But now we have appreciated the challenge, and now we are on the almost 20 plus days on a lockdown or curfew. But slowly we have to open businesses. I know countries, they are on the 40th day, but slowly they are also opening up. So we are also learning from other countries so that the lessons from there we can implement here. I'm glad this industry has been resilient before, but the magnitude of the effect of this crisis might actually transform the industry. In a way, we need to find a solution, not only rebounds as how we were, but we need to transform of being a better sector than ever imagined. Because the world must travel, but traveling will be cautious in the next 2 years. Traveling will be comfortable when there is a discovery of the vaccine. And the vaccine will take at least 18 months to 2 years. So we are concerned, how do we survive in the next 2 years? So that is our worry. But our consultation with the industry, as well as knowing what is happening, I think the domestic market will recover sooner than later. But again, the domestic market needs to be approached differently. We need to appreciate the taste of the domestic market. What type of products do they require? We need to appreciate the domestic market is sensitive in pricing. So we need to change the model of tourism in Kenya. So also we know that the domestic market only responds to vacation, mainly on the beach. We need to, again, diversify to the domestic market. Vacation is not only on the beach. The vacation can be also in national parks, in scenery areas, and the northern part, which is a paradise of this country. So yes, we need to change the product. We need to change the style. We need to change the attitude of our service deliveries. How do we deliver service to the domestic market? So all this is a new norm. So the new norm of the sector must be major. If we think we are going just to recover and be back on our feet,
Yes.
I'm telling you, it's not going to be possible. So we are trying to help the industry also appreciate there'll be a new norm, but what is that new norm? And how do we now fit in the new norm? Those are the things that we are now working hard to make sure that we discover what is the new norm. I know it is too early to discuss about the new norm. It's still evolving, but at the right time, we'll have the solutions of what is the new norm. We hope this crisis goes faster or earlier than the prediction of 2 years. But we are also cognizant of the reality. And the reality is we must have a vaccine. I can tell you, Abi, airlines will be the critical element to get tourism back on their feet. Because without airlines, we cannot get the numbers to come into our country. That in terms of international visitors.
Very salient points you've raised there, Waziri. And of course, I'm really keen to hear from you as well. Many Kenyans perhaps are thinking this is only a Kenyan problem. I know you talked to some of your counterparts in the region from Tanzania, Uganda, South Africa. How is the situation when you talk to other tourism ministers across Africa?
Well, this is a global crisis. The entire world has been affected. So if there is any sector that is majorly affected, is tourism and the hospitality sector. Look at the airlines. Most of them have shut down or reduced their numbers, but also in the next couple of months, if the airline industry does not get bailout or the situation does not improve, most of them will go bankruptcy. That's one key. You have seen the cruise line business actually is as good as shut down totally, and it will be for some time. That's another time. So the impact in Africa is the same. Okay, Africa does not have much tourism. It's only 2% of the global tourism, which is sad, but still it's an opportunity where we can bring tourism and get employment for our people. But this is where the world must know. Africa is where there is nature tourism. Yeah, so this is the place they should come next. I have had discussion with African Union colleagues from different parts of the continent of Africa. Remember, I'm the chairman of the World Tourism Organization of the UN, and I have chaired several crisis meetings globally as well. So we appreciate the continent of Africa is going to change. And probably this is the time the continent of Africa should think about inter-Africa tourism. We need to remove the bureaucracy in terms of visa regime or labor or people going from one country to another in Africa. We need to improve infrastructure, which is rail and road and air. We need to make sure that the air connectivity is affordable and it is also effective or timely. They keep time. So all this, but these are major investments. If we start the investment now, as a vision, I think in 5 years' time, these investments will be ready, as well as it will now improve on the tourism for the continent of Africa.
Interesting. And CS, I also want to just pick your mind. You of course, are leading a very interesting ministry that I cannot but sympathize with the situation right now. Hotels having to ask employees to take unpaid leave, some asking for matters to do with pay cuts. And as an industry, do we have a recovery plan? Because at the end of it all, we do hope that this coronavirus is a passing cloud and eventually things will bounce back. But as a tourism industry, what is the roadmap to take us back to where we were and receiving almost over 2 million visitors per year?
Well, definitely we must have a recovery plan. The recovery plan I've discussed with the industry, and we have a whole raft of issues to discuss within government. So the recovery plan has been presented to the government. It varies from cash flow issues. It varies from a revolving fund, a recovery fund. It varies about how do we defer taxes. It varies about technology, marketing, name it. So there's a whole raft of recovery plan that I have forwarded on behalf of the sector to the government. But also within government, we have to be also rationalizing those issues and also be pragmatic of what we can afford and what we cannot afford. I know it is tough. It's not easy. But I have had a meeting with the Hotel Association, and they told me that in the next 3 months, things like going on leave and deferred leave also is one strategy. Then all of us are taking pay cuts. All of us in the country, including myself, have taken a pay cut to support the COVID fund. So all of us need to be also coming forward to say, this is my sacrifice. I know it's painful for me, but this is my sacrifice. That is the spirit we need to work together. But I can tell you, we will recover. We will come back as a sector. The COVID crisis must be a passing cloud. It's going to be a bit dragged a bit, but it will be a passing cloud. We have seen crises like this, and luckily tourism in Kenya and in Africa, we have been resilient because we have gone through many challenges. The Al-Shabaab crisis, the bombing, the insecurity, the travel advisories. But today, it is unprecedented crisis. And we need to have that unity of purpose and saying, what is our solution? I believe wherever there is a crisis, there is an opportunity. And this is the opportunity we need to transform the hospitality industry, the aviation industry, the conservation and wildlife industry sector. All those needs to come together and say, we need to have a new restart. So to reset the sector is crucial. Without resetting it, we might miss the opportunity when the world opens, because there will be a new norm, a new traveler, new behaviors, and those behaviors are going to be very weird and very demanding. For example, the emergency crisis or measures that we have put in prescribed by the Ministry of Health, of lockdown, of hygiene, all these measures are good for us because the world is watching. Who is abiding with the World Health Organization measures? And are the countries like Kenya doing the right things or the bad things? Then when they start opening and they start traveling, they'll have confidence that Kenya has the capacity, and Kenya has the capacity to make sure the visitors are safer. You remember last week there was an announcement from Russia saying they will not allow their citizens to travel internationally for the next 6 months. Germany did the same. European Union did the same. Spain did the same. So everybody will want to safeguard their citizens from not traveling because they are worried the second wave of the spread of the virus. So they don't want a country that will receive visitors to be the country that spreads the virus. That's why we are taking these stringent measures. And thank you. I congratulate my colleague, Minister Kagwe, because he's just been very clear on it. We Kenyans must see this is not a government agenda. This is our own health agenda. We must protect it, and we must protect our country because there is the future we want to count on. And these measures are important. Without prescribing to these measures, we will not be respected as a country that has abided to health measures and hygiene.
Of course, I'm very interested to hear more from you about the recovery plan. And I do know that President Uhuru Kenyatta is on record saying that even him as the president, he has taken a pay cut, and it bothers him that to see all this happening, and it's a painful experience for the country. Over and above that, Waziri, this recovery plan, we've heard of a number of stimulus packages that President Uhuru Kenyatta has announced, touching on taxes, tax reliefs. We've heard him talk about cash disbursements to the elderly. And for the tourism sector, do you have any specifics? How much have we set aside? Do we have the fund? How much is expected to go in there? Because these are the hard questions that employers are looking for when they look to hear from the minister.
Well, let me tell you that the effect of this crisis is across the board, is not to the tourism sector per se. The stimulus package that His Excellency the President announced of reduction of VAT, it helps across the board. The reduction of pay as you earn, it gives you more surplus money to save and to spend. So all these measures are positive across the board. Definitely we will need to look at the sectoral interests and how do we revive them. For example, the SME fund, for example, that will go across all sectors, not only tourism. That is crucial. And we in the tourism sector, the SME subsector needs to be prepared when that fund is being introduced. How do we benefit from it? I don't think, maybe it's too early to say that we will have a fund specifically for tourism. But in the tourism sector, we have actually coordinated with Ministry of Labor. So the issue of leaves, the issue of all labor issues are now being smoothened by the Ministry of Labor and the unions, because the reality is different. So there are some things that can be specific to the tourism sector. There are some things which are not going to be specific. For example, we definitely need to invest money in post-corona marketing campaign. And we have allocated already 500 million for that. But we cannot sell the destination now. We need to prepare to sell the destination when the world is open. It will be disastrous to sell the destination now. The only thing what we are doing is we must be visible as a nation currently where the crises are, because people are in their homes. People have time to see what countries do. And we don't need to sell balloon safaris or the beaches, but we need to tell them they exist. But we need to tell them how CS Kagwe is performing with his frontline team. We need to show how the investment goes to the hospitals and how are we transforming our health sector. Those are the bases of the barometer to check how have we performed in mitigating this pandemic.
Thank you, CS. I like your message of hope and the resilience that you're exuding, that Kenya will rise again after Corona. And Waziri, talk to us about the issues that touch on especially wildlife right now. Well, we have a number of national parks in the country. Kenyans are trying to understand, are they still able to visit the parks? What happens next? And maybe just also talk to us about how has the wildlife sector been hit? Because these are two sisters. When you talk about tourism, it goes hand in hand with wildlife.
Well, the wildlife sector is very important, and that is the flagship, baby of the Kenya's tourism, because it is the nature tourism. Without safari and without wildlife, we cannot sell Kenya as a destination, or we will not be competitive for that matter. But safaris and wildlife are crucial, parks are crucial, conservancies are crucial. Yeah, it's unfortunate that, this has happened and it has affected everybody. So conservancies are as good as closed because they depend on tourism revenues from lodges and from park entry fees. Same thing to parks. Yeah, but we need to think deeply about conservation, because conservation should not be fully reliant on just tourism revenue. We need to do something differently. And I appreciate the projects like the NRT projects in northern Kenya. They have a combination of coexistence between wildlife, livestock, and maybe agriculture. So if we can find a mechanism and a model that we can do these things, I think it will help a great deal to conserve wildlife. But yes, I know the community conservancies has almost 3,500 rangers who we need to safeguard so that they keep their jobs and they protect wildlife on our behalf. Apart from that, KWS itself, who run almost 80% of the landmass for wildlife, or for the country, and they have to be sustained. How do we maintain the 6,000 employees in Kenya Wildlife Service? And again, Kenya Wildlife Service depends on revenues from tourism, park entry fees, which almost, it brings almost 60% of their revenue, and the other 40% comes from government support. So all these disruptions definitely affect wildlife conservation. That's why we need to remodel all our organizations, including KWS, including the conservation sector. And I am open, and I have discussed this with Treasury. How do we mitigate the circumstances now? Then we sit down with the stakeholders and remodel the entire conservation sector. Otherwise, this behavior of handouts from donors or waiting for the tourists to come, this can be a disaster for the future. So we need to think. As much as we are saying we need to restart or reset the tourism sector, we need to remodel the conservation sector as well.
All right. And CS, finally, of course, to the investors who are listening to you on this interview, what is your message to them? Someone perhaps who had plans to come set up a hotel in Kenya, someone who wants to open a camp in the Mara, someone who basically wants to set up a restaurant. Is Kenya still viable for them to consider this as a destination?
First of all, if one of the countries in Africa that is smooth in terms of doing business and people are psyched in terms of private enterprises is Kenya. We have an educated population and a young population as well. Secondly, our ease of doing business is below 50. Yeah, it's 50 and below. So these are things that creates assurances to the investors. Yeah, our system, our judiciary is working. Our executive is sensible and sensitive to what the people want. Our legislation as well, legislative arm of government, also is sensitive to public participation and public input. So we have a governance structure that promotes private enterprises and safeguards investment of our people. So yes, we have a country that's already geared, is not something new. We need to be efficient as government. We need government to be more facilitative. We need government to be on e-citizen or e-commerce. We need e-government. We don't need anymore. And this has been a lesson. You have seen our Ministry of Lands, for example, the land registry is closed, and how important that land registry is. So these are the time that we wake up and we get the entire government delivery system to deliver through the digital platform. So the digital platform is going to be very crucial for our transformation. And yes, we need to be compatible to that transformation of technology. I want to say also, not only about just delivering government services, but the way how we do business. Look at us today. I'm at home, I'm under lockdown at home, but I am working. I haven't worked as stressful and because the circumstances are difficult, but I enjoy working as well. But we have been effective as government. How do we make sure that we configure all our lives to be even better than now? And the final thing is also, how do we conduct our politics, elections? Why do we have to queue to go and vote? Why don't we vote electronically? These are things that we need to think beyond just the normal way of life. So we need to transform not only our tourism sector, our government delivery processes, but also our political and social behavior in this country.
All right. Thank you, CS. Such a pleasure having you on the program. And keep up with the good work, sir. And I did see some pictures of you on social media where you are with a cheetah. Some people are saying it's Photoshop, but for me, I know you're actually in the park. Or am I wrong?
I was in the park 2 weeks ago when the lockdown started. Yes, I decided just to drive into Nairobi National Park, and it was very refreshing. And I can tell you, even the animals are feeling the freedom without humans. So sometimes we need a break to give to the animals as well.
I like that. And we also want to say Ramadan Kareem to you, Waziri, and your entire family. And we really appreciate the fact that you've spared some time to join us on this program. We really value this, Waziri.
Thank you, and Ramadan Mubarak to all Kenyans and the world over. Thank you very much, Abi. Thank you. And it's always nice to talk to you.
Well, we now want to dive into the markets and take a look at what are the numbers looking like. I'll be speaking to Samuel Gishohi from NCBA Bank.
So, Gishohi, let's talk about how the markets have been performing since Corona struck for the Kenyan market and, of course, the global market. What sort of trends are you seeing?
Oh, well, it's been a very interesting time. I think if there was a roller coaster in markets, this was a roller coaster. We began, of course, with a lot of skepticism at the beginning, wondering what was going to happen when we got the first coronavirus case announced in the country. However, by the time that happened, the market had already sort of factored that in, since foreign investors who take up more than 70% of our market had already exited en masse, and that had caused the market to slump by over 20%. That said, during the same period, we have seen a very strong uptick by our local high net worth clients, and that is very interesting because it clearly indicates that our investors in our market, being more sophisticated, and especially the high net clients, have seen an opportunity to buy into the market. So we did see quite a bit of activity on both sides, with foreigners mainly on the sell side, which drove the slump. And then we saw a stagnation. I think when the likes of KCB reached around 34 and equity around 33.50, 33.80, we saw them sort of stagnate. And then now the announcements kicked in. And then, of course, the announcement period with dividends, equity increasing theirs to 2 shillings and 50 cents. KCB also did 2 shillings and 50 cents. We saw others, but mainly KCB, Equity, and Safaricom have been the focus. So we've seen quite a bit of activity. There's not that much in terms of volumes, but we have seen buy and sell activity, which is creating quite a bit of volatility. And in a market, volatility is your friend.
All right. And Gishoy, I just want to pick your mind. When you talk about the volatility that we have experienced, what do you have to say in terms of what does the future hold for the market? That is the one question every buyer is asking, every seller is asking.
Well, at the end of the day, I will still go back to the fact that foreign investors take up over 70% of our market. They sold, and that was the cause of most of the exits. So the issue now is when, not if, the markets will start to regain post-coronavirus. And this is really a function of when will the foreign investors start to come back to our market. We've also seen a bit of local QIIs, the qualified institutional investors, also coming back to the market in the last 1 or 2 weeks. And we saw them sort of concentrate on where the books closure, for example, in KCB were, and they picked up quite a bit of that and pushed the prices. So that said, again, the economies will suffer. People will now have less disposable income. So it could be a long-drawn stagnation once this whole volatility thing is over. If people don't have enough money to enough disposable income to invest in the stock market and the securities markets. And of course, unlike other situations, we haven't seen that much of a flight to safety, where usually in a situation where stocks are slumping, then people will move their money to fixed income, which is bonds and T-bills, and also into fixed deposits. We have seen quite a bit of local investor activity on the buy side, which is very good for our market. It just means that in as much as it is not sustainable if the foreigners keep selling incessantly, it is a good time to buy. It is a time when investors are seeing the opportunity at these low prices. KCB equity were at 55 somewhere in January. Safaricom was at 33.50, which was their highs, and now you're buying them at deep discounts. And this, as long as their fundamentals remain stable, of course, we are yet to see how much banks' balance sheets will suffer based on maybe they're going to have more defaults and maybe more issues with maintaining their loans and restructuring the loans. We'll see how that pans out, and once we see the sort of results we're going to get around July for the half year, and of course the first quarter results, we are going to start to see exactly what to expect in terms of valuations.
All right, thank you so much, Samuel Gishohi from NCBA. And with that, we want to wrap up the show on this day, and we do thank you for your valid feedback. And remember, you can always engage with us on our social media handles appearing at the bottom end of the screen. And on behalf of the entire team, for us, we say adios. See you next time. Keep safe. And of course, remember to ensure you are always within the WHO guidelines.